Welcome, everyone. That there should have been a crossfade there, and it would have looked way better. But welcome to episode 0 of Patronage. This is a Burning Wheel campaign with me and 3 lovely people. I hope everyone's doing fab. Ashton, I know it's super early for you, so thank you for coming out.
It's fine.
So shall we go around and introduce everyone before we dive into these lovely questions that I've put on the board for everyone to think about for our game.
Wall of madness that we've logged into.
Yes. So Ash, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ashton. For like I was saying earlier, like maybe we should all just be Ash for convenience sake.
Yes, everyone.
Hi, I'm Ash. Yeah. Hi, I'm Ash. I'm a game designer and a streamer. And yeah, I am real excited to play Burning Wheel, considering I've not played it before. So yeah. Oh, and my pronouns are she, her. I remembered.
You remembered. From one person who hasn't played Burning Wheel to our resident expert in Burning Wheel, Dave.
We need to stop doing this to him. It's getting mean.
Yeah.
I don't mean it.
We'll break him.
Yeah, we'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
We were talking just before we started about how much of the rules everybody remembers or has read, and yeah, I can play the game okay, but starting it off with all this life path stuff, I've not done that for like years. I've totally forgotten all of it.
Yeah,
so
it's okay.
But to introduce myself, I'm Dave, and the pronouns I use are he, his, and you might have seen me on the Roll20 stuff. That's the other stuff I do on the internet. And I will probably pronounce it as patronage as opposed to patronage because I'm from the south.
That's absolutely fine. I'm also from the south, but I don't know. Words are weird. Finbar, save us.
That is what I am very good at. Hello, Ashley's stream. I've not been on here before. It's very exciting. My name is Finbar. I use he, him pronouns. Places you may have heard my dulcet tones on the internet before is I make a cool gay show with Ashley called Feelings First, where sometimes we're monster teenagers and sometimes we're post-apocalyptic people, and soon we will be cowboys who also have absolute moral authority. It's a good show. You should listen to it. I have never played Burning Wheel before, but I've had these books for literally years, and I am so very excited. It's gonna be fun. We're gonna make a good thing.
Cool. So the idea of sort of the session 0 really is to bring together all of the disparate ideas that we've had for the setting and the world, and bring that together into sort of a more congealed, oozy substance that we can then make characters out of, like clay. See, I linked it back to the art thing.
Huh?
Yeah.
Did you?
I tried my hardest.
It's okay. We'll be the ones who actually have to do that part.
Yeah, exactly. I just get to sit here and write notes. So I think to kick us off, like I've spoken a bunch on stream and in other places about the general sort of, like, as far back as you can pull from the idea of the campaign, that I wanted this show to be about artists and people who make art and people who buy art, and how art is used and misused by society to tell stories and things like that. and I've tried my hardest not to think of everything going in before we start doing sort of the group world building to sort of so we all get a say in what's going on. And
would you say that you have drawn a map and left blank spaces?
Yes, I have done that in my brain.
Different
Tobal.
game.
So the wonderful Lord and Savior Luke Crane has wonderfully laid out a bunch of questions that we can try and ask to set up the world. So I think it's probably best if we just go through this list. I've already culled a couple of the questions that I don't think are interesting.
Sure.
But we can start filling in answers and stuff. And so we want to sort of the big picture thing, like I say, is like art and artists and
yeah, and also like the kind of intersections therein of like some brief conversations we've had behind the scenes around like how class intersects with art, like that kind of the high arts and the low arts and how money influences these things and so on and forth. That's which I know there's a thing later on when we do like cultural traits. I know a way that's been reworked in other campaigns is to do them as like class traits, which is maybe a discussion we'll have then. But yeah, those are the big themes that jumped out to me from our previous discussions. Was like, yeah, it's the place of art in society, but also in like how we value it and how we value different art forms, and who gets to decide what's good.
I think that's going to be like a really important like recurring theme of people who are critical of art and who people listen to when a certain noble says this is the art I like and everyone goes to that.
Which that's gonna be a fun one to answer, because I think we've got some ideas of like the different art forms that we're going to play around with, and then like which of these is capturing which audiences and stuff. So cool. The one that so is there anything else we want to talk about for big picture stuff we want to lay in at the beginning? Because I'm really interested in talking about culture and stuff, because then I can start thinking about names.
Yeah, as far as big picture stuff, I'm really interested in like if we're looking at a period where art is changing, like what art looks like is changing. Like when there's whole bunches of periods of time where like the popular art style like suddenly shifts from like realism, impressionism to fucking Dada or whatever, and I think that's a really interesting like I'm looking at like what's changing and evolving.
So that's definitely something that's been sort of stuck in my head and thinking about, because if we go to the codex sort of talks about the three sort of standard types of Burning Wheel game, being like the quest, the struggle, and intrigue. And sort of going in, sort of my instinct is that this is an intrigue type game.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way.
I think it's leaning more on that.
And so intrigue generally works best when there is an established culture and then something happens to change that culture. And power vacuums open up and the culture shifts in response to that. So usually someone important dies, and that creates a power vacuum that people move into, I think in sort of this sort of setting that I'm thinking of, we're maybe looking at the shift from the nobility to the sort of wealthy middle class.
And what their tastes are. Yeah, right, cool.
That's there's definitely a part of that I'm interested in. Like I've mentioned that I'm kind of interested in working in more the theater space of like, and that's going to be the thing my character's about. Which I guess that does bring into the idea of like making popular stuff and like that, which I don't know. Like if we want to do a bit of a thing of like how accessible was art to common folk before that, and like, the idea of like I'm not making money because I sell one statue to a wealthy person. I'm making money by getting lots and lots and lots of people.
Right. Yeah. Like Da Vinci was painting a painting, but Shakespeare was writing plays for hundreds of people to see at the same time.
A penny a ticket, a second penny for a cushion. That sort of thing. So that like that, I guess, a thing that kind of might work is if we're looking at like somebody died or something. Maybe there's a very Puritan ruler passed away and kind of some laws lifted around like what artistic expression was allowed to be. But that like
there's also the like kind of technological advance that can create a lot of these sorts of things. You know, the invention of the printing press, or the construction of like a space that can sit a lot of, like, you know, the construction of something like the globe would you know, make a big difference to technologically to the availability of that kind of art.
So one thing that really jumps to my mind is the rise of the Medici family in Italy. So the Medicis were a small like wine merchant family who rose to power when they convinced the Pope to give them sole access to mines for a type of red dye that's used in the robes of not bishops, begins with a C, cardinals, like cardinal robes. That red dye, a huge amount of it was found. Pretty much the only mine in the world was in Florence at the time, and so that was found in it, and it catapulted this one family to from wine merchants to ruling family of Florence. And so I think maybe it is a resource thing. Something has been found that has brought a huge amount of money into the setting. It's allowed some kind of new
that definitely, and yeah, if there's now like money filtering down into making, you know, like more merchant families rather than like traditional aristocratically powerful families, that changes the power balance, which is cool.
Right. And playing off the title of the campaign itself, it seems like the ideas everybody having is going to be around this period of change between religiously mandated art being the main source of patronage for people,
absolutely,
money, to it being, you know, potentially commercial. It's a thing people can make to sell, as opposed to being a thing used to consolidate power via, you know,
it's not just
propagating their own kind of beliefs, showing their own established power structures through the availability of this otherwise, you know, like almost totally useless kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was like the one like roaming panto troupe, and then just we're doing the nativity again. That was sort of it, and now we're like, no, well, we can do more than that.
Yeah. So I think there's also thank you, Dave, for bringing up like the religious aspect. I think there's an interesting like religion can act as a foil to sort of the new money, in that we can have while the middle class and the merchant families are growing and they're spending money on the arts, the sort of the state religion can be pushing back and being like, oh no, you can't. Why are you making all these statues of naked men? No, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, traditionally, and I guess historically, it's interesting in terms of, when you study aesthetics or that kind of branch of philosophy, the distinction between high art and low art, again, which we touched on, tends to be whether or not it is reinforcing those prevalent like societal ideas. And in our history, that was the ones held by the church, things that they had a heavy degree of control over, because of exclusivity and that sort of thing, were typically higher or seen as better forms of art. And yeah, I guess redressing that balance is the time period that we're setting ourselves in. So that's cool.
Yeah.
No, I'm not playing another religious character.
So I think the last thing I wanna say before we move on to sort of more establishing the culture is like scale wise. For the start, I want the game to be kind of small. My idea that the majority of the scenes would take place in like one district of a city, sure. not even a whole city, just like one. Like focus right down to like one small area, which will be near like an artist guild, and I had an idea of a plaza where people do gallery openings and there's a theater and so there's a nexus in the city for all of the artistic things happening, and so most of the scenes will happen in that place.
I like the idea that is like near, like that it's immediately adjacent some large religious building or institution. Like that's the reason that it got to exist in the first place, right? Is because it was like right next to like a cathedral or something, and they're like, yes. For all of the religious art, it needs to be conveniently located and all like connected, and then then you've got that like that directly like physical clashing of this thing right next to, I like that.
Yeah. And similarly for the characters and for having us interact with each other, being physically co-located in a very short space is gonna necessitate us competing or whatever as artists, which is exciting.
Simultaneously competing and also like having to put on the face of like the artists as a front of like, no, we deserve to have our spot in the city and we will not be intimidated by the church and the rich people. We'll make our stuff here and this is what we do. And then like as soon as everyone else out of the room, we like immediately turn on each other. Because we're a bunch of drama queens. I mean, actors at least.
Yes.
All the ones I know anyway.
So if we move on then, sort of talking about the sort of cultural analogues, and sort of this sort of historical stuff that we've talked about. For me, the obvious cultural analogue is Renaissance Italy.
100%.
Yeah. That there is a reason I used a picture of Florence for all of the promo stuff for this.
I've just realized why I recognize the building in this, and it's because of Assassin's Creed 2, and I remember climbing that tower.
Climb that tower, yeah.
A lot. I climbed that tower a lot of times.
Every time there's news coverage of like of like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I'm like, yes, I remember that part of Jerusalem.
So for me, it was watching Spectre, the 007 film. There's a bit where he's running along the roofs in Istanbul, and I'm like, I've done that. I run on those roofs.
So the one I have been to, I think it's Florence is the city you start in Assassin's Creed 2, isn't it?
Yes.
So I've been to Florence specifically, and we were wandering around. It was a family holiday. Mum was trying to do a serious art history tour of Florence. And I was getting like, I know this. Why don't? And then I stopped in the middle of a square, and my mum and her partner walked on a little bit, and they turned around and went, "What's up?" I was like, "I've been here." And they're like, "No, you haven't." In a video game. And then I proceed to launch into an alternate history tour, and I could actually find my way between different locales of Florence.
Nice.
Based on Assassin's Creed 2. I'm getting way off topic. Let's talk
Yeah.
about our setting.
I was gonna say, as far as other cultural analogues that I'm interested in, and other like periods of history, the Dadaist movement, and the way that is a bunch of small artists not giving a fuck. That's interesting to me as well. As far as introducing and then the movement from Dadaism into Surrealism, like that movement of like, actually the art doesn't have to make sense even, right? Like that's a cool period to take some inspiration from as well.
And so I want to ask, like, are we thinking like height of the Renaissance? Are we thinking like in the early days as things are sort of, the steam is starting to build, or are we past the point where sort of the old masters did all their great works, and now there's like a rejuvenation, or there's a chance for a rejuvenation or a chance for things to sort of crash and burn?
I really like that last one where there's been like the fancy Renaissance, right? That's already happened.
Yeah.
And now it's a question of like, what actually happens next now that we are supposedly enlightened?
I am also kind of interested in the idea of there being like big cultural pressures in what art should look like. Like, religious people think that all paintings should be of Jesus. That there are people who think that plays should do X. But also that there are artists who've succeeded and gone, this is how you make art well. Like, that we have people kind of pushing us on in that way, and like there are traditions to break, like new ones to start. That's I think as Ash mentioned, like, yeah, the kind of that we can change which movement we're in. Is more interesting. My art history is not super strong, so I'm gonna be talking in vague terminology. Which probably means
one of the reasons that I know anything about art, and the reason that I'm like, oh yes, Dadaism and Surrealism, is because like I know Emily, and she knows about those things, and she knows about those things, so I know a little bit about them by proxy.
Yeah.
Osmosis. Artsmosis? No.
Finbar.
I'm sorry. The thing I'm kind of interested in is that in the Burning Wheel book, like, we talk about like, there's a very set time period it normally would occur in, of like nights and so on.
So for people who don't know, Burning Wheel does two time periods really, really well, and that's like 15th and 16th century Western Europe and 12th century China.
Which not gonna do the China one because none of us are even remotely Chinese.
I mean, like I've done a bunch of like study, but
I've heard you do a lot of criticism of my Chinese pronunciation in games we play offline. It's fair. I'm not saying you're wrong.
No one's pronunciation of Chinese things is as bad as Luke's, so
this is reasonable. It's just that I'm kind of I've watched a lot of Burning Wheel games that are set kind of earlier on in that spectrum, and I'd be kind of interested in being that the printing press is a thing, like that we can distribute leaflets in the street for our shows, that like that dueling is maybe a thing, that like pistols
Yes,
at dawn
yeah,
is starting to become a bit
yeah,
of a
we're
thing.
we're not in knights in plate armor with broadswords. We're in like dandies in flowery costumes with rapiers.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dave is making
Great
faces.
face. Oh my god.
People who know me know my feelings on rapiers.
That they're amazing for beheading anyone and everything.
No, they're
A rapier for beheading people?
Yeah, that's what you use them for.
babies.
No, the point of a rapier is that you can just jam in there and just.
Yeah, I'm not about that. I'm about that slashing damage life. A good sword does slashing damage, not piercing damage.
Dave has opinions on swords.
We're getting to the point. I feel like we're just at the point where like cannons might be a thing. Like the yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Mainly because I want weird technology, and like we'll get into the magic question in a minute, and like weird technology and magic sounding set that I can use as like set dressing, and do wild set nonsense.
Yeah,
magic.
like it's that thing of like Tchaikovsky going, wait, cannons could be instruments, and everyone being like, Tchaikovsky, no.
Yeah, Tchaikovsky, yes. There's a sentence I didn't expect to say this morning. Oh dear. But yeah, so we're kind of going with sort of, yeah, like a late Renaissance Italy as our sort of analog. Is that like also where we're going to pull naming sensibilities from? Like, is this a very explicit like Florence, Rome sort of situation? Or are we going to kind of like shift the culture we're drafting like fashion and naming and stuff from?
Russia. We can have Ivan the Terrible have just died, or
I find myself generally quite bad at proper nouns.
Fair.
I feel like drawing the majority of inspiration from Italy and sort of the south of France and sort of that part of the Med. Is probably the best bet.
Okay.
I feel like it's.
Oh.
Do you have feelings, Dave? Like, were there other things that were interesting to you, Dave?
I had a curveball that came to me earlier today.
Okay, hit me.
Culture, but if you want to expand upon the setting,
hit us with that curvy ball.
Okay. I noticed that there might potentially be a very interesting interaction, because this is a fantasy game, between this period of history and a culture inherent to fantasy and to this game that is also focused on certain kinds of artistry and craftsmanship, but didn't have a chance to interact in the real world because there are no dwarves, but there could be.
I was gonna bring up the question later if we want to have different life paths.
I think
other than
dwarves is
Manish.
really cool because they have their established craftsmen's guilds in like the dwarven life paths. They have very skilled craftspeople and artisans, but they don't delve into arts per se. They don't have playwrights, they don't have painters and that kind of thing. And I was very interested in potentially being an outcast dwarf who has seen the potential and wants to bridge that gap to see what happened when someone who's brought up on carving runes and stones gets up to given a brush instead of a chisel sort of deal.
Okay.
If people are cool.
I kind of like the idea of the hills of Tuscany are actually where the dwarf cities are under.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, I mean, you like dwarves. You're talking my language, so.
Yeah, we're playing a fantasy game. And we're getting to make our weird alternate history Renaissance. that sounds cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm into
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like the Dwarven Alps.
Yeah.
But yeah, we could have them draw on.
And now I'm like thinking about like the interaction of like now I'm being like, yes, the dwarves who helped get the elephants through to knock down Rome the first time, or so,
I like this.
yeah.
But so I'm sure we can have a very long conversation about the wider world that we live in. But we want to zoom into because we're as Ash mentioned, we have a limited amount of time, so I want to stay on target. But we're in a specific city. Do we want this to be a very cosmopolitan city in that like fantasy races way, fantasy stocks, whatever, of like that there is a large contingent of dwarven peoples, dwarven craftsmen as a large, or is this a explicitly human city in which an outcast dwarf has moved into to kind of test their mettle against the craftsmen of
Yeah, so
craftsmen of
I
men?
guess it's one of those things where it's the dungeon world question of, oh, you're an elf, are you the only elf?
Yeah,
and is it interesting if you're the only?
I think if Dave wants to play a dwarf, I like the idea of Dave being the only dwarf in the in the like little like micro section of the city that we're
in the little
right?
microcosm
like maybe not in
that
the
we're
city,
creating,
but in this microcosm, right? Like it's that one of those things where it's a city that thinks it's more cosmopolitan than it is.
There's one dwarf bar on the other side of town.
They're like, wow, look at all of these strange people that are coming in through the new technology of carts with actual wheels or whatever the fuck it is. And it's like, yeah, there are like a few people and they just all get that have like, yeah, there's more trade in this kind of period because, you know, because there's more production and things like that. And so you get more, you get more migration and things like that. But it's still definitely but we're from around here, right? Like there's definitely that element to it where like old families are a thing.
And the considerations I had with bringing this idea up specifically were when you tend to have different stocks, you can end up with a very overpowered character, and that is a reasonable thing to say to me and be like, it's a cool idea, but you can't play one because you might have more points than other people, and that's fine. And it really is kind of off the wall. We were getting into a very very nice, and everybody was very happy with the kind of culture that we were drawing on. And it's okay for it to be a bit too outlandish. And
I do really like the idea. I think it's very cool. I haven't read any of the Dwarven Life Paths, but that's something I can put on my reading list.
Yeah, that's your concern. That's no worries at all.
I mean, I'm kind of almost explicitly interested in making it a bit outlandish. Like, it's a fantasy game, and we have many fantasy things out there that are cast in very similar ways, and like I don't know if I've ever seen the fantasy show that has a dwarven artist working in like Florentine
and then
society.
I think on top of that, I'd like to say I like the idea that elves like exist, but they're so far away that no one's ever seen one.
Yeah, like I mean, like in my head, when like my favorite depiction of elves is as is when they have a culture that's akin to something more akin to something like Imperial China. I feel like that's that kind of makes sense to me, especially when you're like if you are if you're in a setting where like there is a traditional European sort of like fantasy setting. I like that as our like oh wait, you know, like there are these other cultures that have have, you know, these other structures of and things like that, and so
it kind of strikes me now as we're talking about it. The elves already had a renaissance, like thousands and thousands of years ago.
Yes, yeah.
In this setting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They're so far ahead that we look like children, and they probably are like come back to us in a couple of thousand years of culture.
Yeah.
And weave magic into the things. You're still using a brush. Ugh.
Yeah, there's something I've always wanted to do, and it's definitely for a different game in a different setting. But I've always wanted to look at like gentrification through elves. Like you can have you've got Blacksmith's Row, well, an elven bladesmith just moved in, and all of you are out of a job.
That season 2 is an elvish sculptor turns up and they're like deep in modern art. They walk in and just like throw out like some weird thing and just go, yeah, no, what is art though? And we're all like, oh, we can't compete with that.
But yeah, no, it's something I've always been interested in, but definitely not for this game.
Yeah, we're definitely not there yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, so
okay.
Elves are off somewhere being insular and having all that shit sorted, and maybe occasionally we get like one piece of elven craftsmanship in here, and we're all like, "What
is this?
What in the name of the gods is this thing?"
Yes.
A few dwarves come through. We have a slight oddball living amongst us who is an artist, which is not a traditionally pursued thing by that culture, but cool. This is a predominantly human city.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely feeling like Alpsy Swiss kind of dwarves.
Yeah.
Like, check out our clockwork, and we're all like, well, we can make clocks, but holy shit, right? Like,
I'm gonna want a dwarven set builder.
Okay. So in terms of like conflict and stuff, this is kind of a tricky question in sort of intrigue type games, and especially in sort of the general idea that we're building, which doesn't have any sources of traditional conflict. Like, we haven't talked about there being any wars happening or anything like that. I see the main source of conflict is going to be financial, and generally because if you look at all of the life paths that lead to picking up the sort of artistic skills, they don't land you with a lot of resource points. And so the struggle is really going to be able to get people to pay for all the stuff you want to do.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw one in straight off from my stuff I've been looking at, is that to get some more resource points and also to complicate my character's life, a thing I was looking at dipping into was the outcast section, specifically around smuggling. So because let's like, I'm interested in like, we have the big powers, the established noble families, the church, the merchant princes who have their investments in like artistic endeavors, but like crime lords buying expensive paintings with their ill-gotten gains and then selling it for not ill-gotten gains is a thing that exists in the modern world, and we can make it push that. Like, bringing criminality into like, we talk about it being, I think in the initial tweet you put out, that this plaza has sin flowing in and out of it. And where there's money and people willing to spend it, there's people willing to take it off you for less than salubrious reasons.
So I think I've just written down 4 things in my notebook, that sort of the 4 places that money is going to flow into this area is through the underworld, through the religious structure, through the merchant families, and then through the noble families. And there will be, like, each of those groups will have different ideas about what art looks like and what they want you to make, and how much they're willing to spend. And then there'll also be pressures from those groups on the other groups. So like, the religious people are going to be pressuring the nobles, and the merchants are going to be pressuring the underworld, and vice versa. And so there's going to be there's a lot of webs for potential characters to get caught in between those sort of larger power structures.
Sure. I have. Oh, go.
Just if we wanted to introduce more, if we wanted more conflict around the place, chat did earlier mention, like, raise the question of, like, if we're in a period where, like, where art is being changed by the introduction of things like printing press, then there's the question of, like, religious reformation as well. But I'm not sure if that's a thing that, like, I think that could be a good, like, background conflict to be happening if we want, like,
that feels like something where that definitely feels like you circles up a religious fanatic and you failed your role. Well, now they want to start a reformation and they're going to use you as the vehicle.
Yes, I definitely agree. I think it's really cool background addressing, but not what we're laser.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. If we just want to have that as a background conflict that's going on, it's happening in places that aren't the Piazza.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a question about nobility. And specifically, from where is nobility derived? Are they like the chosen of the king? Are they relatives of the?
In my mind, there are old noble families. Like 200 years ago, this whole place was ruled in a traditional feudal structure, and
has that collapsed?
A lot of the like minor houses, like people will still say, "Oh yes, I'm of House Brown," and but everyone knows that House Brown doesn't have any money anymore or holdings, or they got bought out by some merchant family 20 years ago and they don't own anything anymore.
It's just about okay in certain situations to snub people if they're minor nobles. If you have a bunch of money, you can just be like, yeah, I sort of don't care, and other people might not just be like, and just be like,
In my mind, the sort of power structure is we're already in a time period where there isn't a king, but there is a like a prototype like oligarchical government.
Okay.
So there is like a senate or a signoria or
there's no empty throne that hasn't been filled in years because all the families who might have some claim are like sort of dancing around each other. That's not what. Okay.
Yeah. And sort of when you look at the history of sort of Italy, like really Italy never really solidified as one nation until quite recently in historical terms, and it's always been sort of small city states. So there probably is there's a rival city state that's across the bay, and they have a slightly different governmental system where maybe their nobles have slightly more power, but at least here,
and that's another perfect background conflict to have between city states. Which is the most culturally powerful? Who can funnel the most money into their artists and have impressive works? It's totally fund, not even for themselves, but for the conflict against other people who can also waste money on that.
Like with a technological revolution, like the ability of people to move around is starting to become a thing, and it's like, my city is a nice place to live, peasants. It's like, oh, okay, we'll go there. That seems better.
And we would be totally remiss to not speak about the primary conflict of all artists, of competing with other artists. Being seen, being noticed, being renowned for your skill or the things that you're portraying.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're competing, even if it's the theater against a sculptor.
Yeah,
You're in the same sort of arena.
Star power is becoming.
Just make a little diorama of a theater, just put like all the people are dongs.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the most important place in the setting? So I have a name for this, which has been tweeted out. It is called La Piazza dell'Arte, which is Italian for the Plaza of the Arts, and it's capital T, capital A, the Arts. So it is the place in the city. I actually went to my older brother's Italian girlfriend and asked her, how do I say this?
I'm gonna make a fumbling, like, pathetic noise if I ever have to refer to it, and hopefully you'll say it for me. And I hope that's okay.
The Piazza.
I'm going to intentionally butcher it for fun, so.
Yeah.
Alright, fair.
The pizza of the arts.
You can hear a very loud plane. Hang on a second.
The art pizza.
What is this?
Yeah, the
Gonna
art
go-
pizza.
We'll go down to Art Pizza
Okay,
District.
Never mind. Yes. So yeah, people would normally call it the Piazza or La Piazza, the Plaza. But I'm imagining, yeah, like a really big open space with a fountain in the middle. There's a theatre on one end, and the back of a cathedral, and a gallery space, and then there's like an open gallery space where people just be like, oh, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm gonna put my sculpture out, and see if anyone will buy it.
Perfect.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan. I like it.
I'm imagining very if you've ever visited the Edinburgh Fringe, there's like that becomes full on, like you have bits of art, like of stalls selling stuff, you have little mini performances, there's kind of teasers for the show, and then a million people trying to hand you flyers.
yes,
So many
Yeah.
flyers.
Same as it's that in the Adelaide Fringe we have the Garden of Unearthly Delights, which does a similar thing.
Yeah, so it's just that, but every day. Which is cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Okie
Okie dokie. So we've kind of talked about faraway places. So there's sort of the Dwarven Holds that we're sort of seeing as kind of like Swiss.
Famously independent, live in the mountains.
Yes, yeah. And then the sort of infinitely far away elves, and then closer to home there are other city-states.
Which are we presuming that is mostly human?
Yes,
Like,
yeah.
this is just like the big human stretch of land, and there is a isolated dwarven nation that kind of sits in the middle of that territory, and then far away there's an elf place. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, and sort of like it goes beyond that, and we see, we'll see the standard mix of sort of European analogues throughout the rest of the world, and we can mix them together however we want to do that. But they won't sort of come in until much later.
I have one last question about geography. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just because we were talking about like by the Med or by like Tuscany Hills or whatever. Is this a city in the middle of the rolling sunlit hills of Tuscany? Is a city on the shore? Like, what are we? Do we want scenes where someone's out in a vineyard, gazing up at the stars, or do we want scenes where they're sitting on the docks, feet kicking, like throwing bread at like fish, or bottles at fish, more likely because we're frustrated.
I feel like having access to like port trade, I think, is helpful to our conflicts and all those sorts of things.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I just wanted to be like so that I can build my future.
I think the city itself being on the sea, and then there are sort of rolling hills and vineyards, but they're
ways away.
They're a ways away. So I think there's definitely a class thing in the we'd be at a point where a lot of the sort of lower classes and the peasant classes are starting to move into the city, because there's a lot more work in the city and less work in the farms, and then the rich people are moving out of the city, and they're going and living in big villas, and they come into the city to do business, and so there's sort of an inversion of the more traditional split in the classes.
Just a thing that just jumped into my head of that more, but like the idea of there being kind of a noble season where like the people with money all come into the city to spend like time in their like smaller houses, and they do lots and lots of big social engagements, and probably like they'll hire the entire theater, or they'll like commission lots and lots of like art pieces and things like that, so that they have like entertainment on. That's the idea of like, yeah, a lot of the rich people have moved out to their villas, but like in the middle of summer they'll all like come in, and which will give us like cues for like festivals and stuff like that almost. It's just like the rich people are around.
Yeah, no, I really like that.
Having a season just seems cool to me.
Yeah, so I wonder if it's a summer thing or a winter thing. Like they come into the city in the winter, because it's easier to stay warm in the city than it is.
You don't have to heat such a large house.
Yeah. Or the other way around. I'm not sure.
But maybe
my brain definitely went to like autumn as the noble season, because it's because that's like my like here we have like the end of summer, the start of autumn is when you have all of the like going to like tents to see stand-up shows and stuff. But then as you get further and closer into winter, you get more of the like formal, people going inside to see going to like the like more traditional theater and cinema and things like that. As it gets like, so like we start off with like in where I live, we start off with like the Fringe, and then you have a series of other festivals that get more and more like old and haughty.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of happy with it. And pretty much any time. It'd just be interesting if like there's a sort of rise and fall to when the moneyed people are around, can make our lives interesting.
That gives you the like whole thing of, it's connected to like harvest and all those sorts of things. Whereas then the like everyone can go out during spring and summer and be like, oh yes, the like the beauty of nature, rather than
the point of owning a vineyard if you aren't sitting in your garden in the height.
Yeah, exactly.
It also answers a question which I noticed that is on the list a lot further down, and one that it's very easy to overlook until it comes up, but the resource cycle, it being seasonal, therefore makes a bunch of sense. Because if you don't think about it, it's hard to frame whether it's day to day or whether the characters spend weeks working on their next thing, and if it's seasonal, that nails me, I think. So that's a really good idea.
That's a really good point. Shall we take a break before we dive into sort of the mechanical stuff?
Good.
Yeah.
Is there any?
Sounds good.
I'm just checking if there's any like last things.
Is anyone?
Oh, I have one question.
You have one question. Hit me.
On a more like, we can talk about what exactly this might be, but magic people. Where did they like? Do we? This might be a bigger one, and maybe we want to leave it for a second. But like, where do they fit? Do nobles keep a court? Like, do nobles keep a house wizard? Is there like a wizard of the city? Are they their own? Like, we have the church, we have the nobles, we have the merchants, we have the wizards, or mages, or however they end up being. Like, I guess before we get into like the nitty gritty of how magic works and is and stuff,
I prefer the idea that magic users are more sort of sprinkled, instead of there being like a college of the arcana or
Okay.
or
Yeah,
anything like that.
I'm like, yeah, if we're in a place where we're dealing with, if we wanted to, like, the position in the story of like how magic exists, I like the idea of the church kind of having a monopoly on that kind of power, at least up until recently, and that like non-church based, you know,
What's-
things like
the decline of the power of the church has led to like kind of these magical, the witches and the stuff that were previously hunted have been able to come out of the shadows a little more and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
there was up until recently there was faith and there was heresy, and now there is like faith and these sort of burgeoning little pockets of magical expression, and then magic can actually then become part of like artistic expression and this revolution of artistic stuff. Dave, what's your feeling?
Despite throwing in the dwarves, I actually in this campaign, and it's I always feel weird about saying these kinds of things because it feels a bit exclusionary, but I'm not really interested in magic in this campaign at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like,
to explain myself just a little bit, and it's not just trying to ruin fun because I've done it before, but it almost feels a little bit antithetical to me to have this method which has existed previously of expression and creation that lies entirely outside of the focus on art.
Yep.
Because
well, this is the thing. This is the thing, Dave. I'm on board with like the reason that I actually agree with you, and that's the reason for like why I was setting up, if we have magic, that it be monopolized, controlled, and that it be like, if it's not, you know, in the traditional, like, oh, like sometimes miracles happen and that belongs to like bishops or whatever, that it be like out there somewhere we've heard about a witch, right? Like that, like, if magic exists, then that's how I would frame it. But I'm totally on board with being like, yeah, it's just not a thing.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about because realistically, we're all talking about characters that are actually like filling the role of magic, right? That because they are artists.
Yeah.
Okay, we should take our break because we're moving into the discussion that's going to happen after the break.
Yeah.
So we'll be back in a few minutes' time. Feel free to stretch your legs and get a drink, and we will see you after this.